Hello and welcome to Global Order. My name is Ishan Dhar. In 2023, His Holiness the Dalai Lama recognized the 10th Khalkha Jetsun Dampa Rinpoche, a reincarnate Lama with a historical and religious position somewhat analogous to his own in Mongolia. Fast forward to July 2nd, 2025, in the statement in which His Holiness affirmed that the institution of the Dalai Lama would indeed continue, he specifically mentioned stakeholders in Mongolia and the Buddhist republics of the Russian Federation among the several who had requested that the institution of the Dalai Lama continue well after his lifetime. When we think of the Tibetan Buddhist world, we're liable to think of just Tibet and the Himalayan belt. Mongolia and the Buddhist republics of the Russian Federation are also part and parcel of this world, emerging as an often overlooked battleground, or rather spiritual battleground, between His Holiness the Dalai Lama, those loyal to him, and the Chinese government. Joining me today to discuss in detail how His Holiness's forthcoming succession might play out in these regions is a fascinating figure. Telo Tulku Rinpoche is an American-born ethnic Kalmyk Mongol who is also a reincarnate Lama himself, who spent until 2023 30 years as the Šajin or head Lama of the Republic of Kalmykia in the Russian Federation. He continues to serve now as His Holiness the Dalai Lama's honorary representative to Russia, Mongolia, and the CIS countries from Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. Join us for what is undoubtedly going to be a fascinating conversation. Hello, Rinpoche. Thank you very much for joining us here at Global Order. It's very exciting to be able to engage you on this topic, and we're really looking forward to your insights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, before we get into the matter of the forthcoming succession of His Holiness and how that might play out in these regions, it is understood that Mongolia and the Russian Buddhist republics, such as Kalmykia, Buryatia, and Tuva, fall within the Tibetan Buddhist fold, and I guess that would presumably mean mostly under the Gelugpa sect, to which His Holiness belongs. But how would you describe the Dalai Lamas as an institution? What would their historical and, I guess, religious significance be to these people? And I understand there might be regional nuances here.
Well, of course, when we talk about the future, we also have to put into context of the present ongoing political issues, and not only political issues, but also the spiritual matters as well.
Correct.
And in order to go into the present moment of where we are today and where we are now, we also have to go back into history to touch upon the historical facts. And the historical fact is that, as we all know, that Buddhism began in India. From India, it spread to Tibet. From Tibet, it spread to Mongolia. Then from Mongolia, it went beyond into the Russian Federation. Buddhism is part of the Russian civilization for more than 400 years. Many of the scholars don't even know that. That is because they have very limited knowledge about the history of the Kalmyk, the Buryats, and the Tuvan people. So these are the people who are originally Mongolian, but their ethnic group or ethnicity has been part of the Russian civilization for more than 300 to 400 years. In Kalmykia's case, it's been over 400 years. In Tuva's case, it's been over 100 years. And the Buryats, it's been a little bit over 300 years. So, and our form of Buddhism is the Tibetan Buddhism itself. One thing that we have to understand is that sometimes we tend to think that the reincarnation system or the Tibetan Reincarnation Institute or the system only belongs to the Tibetan people, and that is absolutely wrong. Because we are part of one system, part of one tradition. So, however it unfolded and started in Tibet, that's how it also started and began in also Mongolia, as well as in the Russian Federation as well. In Mongolia, there is many highly reincarnated lamas that have been identified historically and also in modern day as well. Not so many in Russia, but I happen to be of Kalmyk origin, who is my predecessor was Mongolian, and his predecessor, a few path reincarnations were born in Mongolia. But if you trace it backwards, then it goes down to the origin of the great Indian Mahasiddha. So you go back to the origins of many centuries ago, then touches upon Indian Buddhism itself. So, we have to really understand that, we tend to think that this whole reincarnation system is a Tibetan matter. Unfortunately, it's not just a Tibetan issue and a Tibetan, matter. So it's beyond its borders of Tibet.
And I'm glad you actually brought up your own personal example. As you said, you are an ethnic Kalmyk Mongol. You are also a Lama yourself. You are you spent, I believe, until 2023, 30 some years as, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this, as the Šajin Lama, or the head Lama of the Republic of Kalmykia. And this was at a very crucial time. The Soviet Union had just collapsed. The republics within the Union, and Mongolia, which was, I guess, never formally a part of the USSR, but had a communist administration at that time, also broke free of its shackles. It seems that there was a solid attempt to revive or restore Tibetan Buddhism in these areas, and you were central to this effort in Kalmykia. Could you explain what these regions had gone through during Soviet rule, and what is it like to restore a religion from scratch? I mean, it
Right.
truly was.
Yeah. Right. So my background, just very briefly, I was born in the U.S. At a very young age. I had an interest to become a monk. And by the recommendation and advice of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to my parents, to send me to India to have a proper monastic education, if I was serious about getting a monastic education. So my parents at the age of 7 sent me to India. So I spent most of my childhood and adolescent years in a Buddhist monastery in South India, in the state of Karnataka. I went there when I was 7 years old. So I pretty much spent most of my childhood in India. So, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, because of my parents and grandparents and my ethnicity, I became involved in restoring, rebuilding, reviving Buddhism in a place where it once flourished before the Cultural Revolution and the Joseph Stalin's purge. So under communism, of course, it's not only Tibet that suffered; it's also Mongolia. They went through a communist regime where there was destruction of many monasteries, many institutions, many monks being wrongly accused, went on trial, assassinated, so much destruction that is taking place in Mongolia. And also at the same time, there is also similarities that also went through in Buryatia, in Tuva, in Kalmykia. So when I was elected as the head of the Buddhist, which they call the Šajin Lama of the Kalmyk people, we basically started from nothing. We didn't have any old historical monasteries or temples that we could begin. begin from. So we had to pretty much start everything from scratch. And we couldn't do it without relying on the monastic communities that were in exile. There was no access to Tibet. We couldn't go to Tibet and, continue, to join any monasteries or even go on the pilgrimage like many of our people have done so for hundreds of years. Historically, all the great scholars of Mongolia and also from Burya, Tuva, and Kalmykia, they all went to Tibet to gain their religious studies or Buddhist studies. And they became top scholars, and they returned home and they continue to propagate the Buddhist teachings in their own places. So in the 20th century, we lost that bond or lost that connection or lost that path. And only during the early 90s that we had the opportunity to revive and restore these historical ties. But unfortunately, we couldn't do it directly with the Tibetans in Tibet and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So we had to do it we had to reconnect with the Tibetans that were in exile, which is India. So since the early 90s till now, we have sent hundreds of students to not only to the monastic institution, but also to other various institutions that under the leadership and the guidance of His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been reestablished. For example, the Tibetan Medical and Astrological Institute, the university that's established in Sarnath, and many other, culture and, religious institutions across India. There has been hundreds of, Kalmyks, Buddhists, Tuvas, Mongolians that went to India to study. So, we, of course, we rejoice.
So there was renewal of cultural and religious.
Yes, and these are individuals that went to India, studied for a number of years. Some of them completed their studies. They returned back to their own home countries and continued to teach. So, at the very beginning stage, when I became the Šajin Lama, of course, there were many challenges, mainly because as a 21-year-old coming in without any administrative background, any project leadership background, and having to become a leader in many different roles, not only a spiritual leader, but also administrative, budget planning. And we don't have that training, so you just basically learn as you go. And that was a very difficult period for me personally, because you're challenging with a mindset that is a post-communist mindset, which is atheist. So many of them did not understand religion. They didn't know the importance of it. Yes, they knew that, Buddhism is part of our historical culture, but, it's not valid in today's time. That's their mindset. So you basically have to work with them, not against them, to slowly find ways of how we can work as a team rather than criticize each other and saying, well, the communist ideology is wrong. This is why religion is needed. So that was probably the most difficult part, which was the very beginning stage. And I think our consistency, not giving up, continue to work, patience, everything paid off in the end. And, 30 years I spent there, and I look back and I see nothing but success. Of course, as humans, along the way, we make a few mistakes here and there, but those are very minor, minor things, and I think every institution, organization, and every community goes through that, what I call growing pains. So, in the end, when I look back 30 years of my life dedicated to reviving, restoring, and rebuilding Buddhism, I see nothing but, good results. And all of this is, we're grateful to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan community in exile, the monasteries that were established. And because of their moral support, their spiritual support, we achieved all these results because of a collective of efforts. It's not just an effort by me alone. It's a collective effort.
Indeed, and I'm glad you also dwelled on, I guess, the interregnum that existed in these regions as far as religion went. Now, coming to in 2023, His Holiness, I guess, publicly announced the identity of, or somewhat the identity of the 10th Khalkha Jetsun Dampa Rinpoche, whose position, I guess, is analogous, perhaps, to the Dalai Lamas of Tibet as far as Mongolia is concerned. Before we go into the specifics of what's happening with the 10th incarnation, I think it would be very useful if you explain what the life of the 9th incarnation was like, which was also very, very interesting. And I believe you even met him, perhaps, on more than one occasion.
Yes. So again, just briefly going back into history, very briefly, the 8th Bogd Jubzun Dampa, he was also of Tibetan origin, but since he was identified as the Mongolian reincarnation of the Bogd, he grew up in Mongolia. He got his spiritual education in Mongolia. And also in 1911 is when Mongolia declared its independence, and the 8th Bogd was identified and recognized and installed as the spiritual and temporal leader of Mongolia, similar to the Dalai Lama of the Tibet. Though he was already a leader prior to that, but on the international, on a global stage, it was not declared and in such a way prior to that. So in 1911 is when the Mongolian declared their independence, and of course, communism was introduced shortly after Mongolian declaring its independence. The 8th Bogd was arrested by the communist government, and later he had died, in the early 20s. Now, the 9th reincarnation was born in Tibet, though he was recognized or identified, I should say, at a very young age, but he was not publicly, enthroned for security reasons and for political reasons as well. So, he grew up, in Tibet in a monastic institution. By that time, Mongolia had already been a communist, country. So there was no way of him going to Mongolia to obtain his studies. So he grew up in Tibet. Later on, he came into exile, and he just lived a very simple life, just like any other Tibetan refugee in exile in India. And only later, when Mongolia became a democratic state back in 1991, and when things started to change, only then they officially enthroned and recognized, gave that full official recognition. And by the time he was already in his 50s, I believe, but he was recognized at a very old age. Though he remained in India, but he had traveled. I invited him to Kalmykia, to Russia, first before Mongolia even invited him. We had the opportunity to invite him to Kalmykia, and then to Buryatia, to Tuva as well. Then he slowly made his way to Mongolia. And so then at a later stage, he was recognized and enthroned in Mongolia at a very, very much later stage. But it had to come sooner or later. But by the time he was recognized, his age was he was already old, and also by the time he was recognized in Mongolia officially, he had already had a stroke. He had some health issues,
Right.
So he decided to remain the remaining part of his life in Mongolia. Though because of his stroke, he was not able to engage in many public teachings. He was not able to flourish as much as we would have wished. but he was there physically, and he was recognized. So so I can't say that the ninth Bogd contributed as much as we would have wished
Right.
because of the circumstances of the 20th century and because of the changes that came at a very late stage, and his enthronement also coming at a very late stage. So, but nevertheless, I mean, the later part of his life, he remained in Mongolia, passed away there, and before passing away, he had sent a message, a request to through certain channels to His Holiness, asking at that time he was very close to his passing, and he asked His Holiness when would be the best time to pass.
Oh.
And that was question number one. And the question number two is, where should my rebirth take place? And through the certain channels, His Holiness had said that it would be auspicious if you wait until the Lunar New Year for your passing. And if you are to reborn, then definitely rebirth should be taking place in Mongolia. And that was the very clear and clear instructions, or what we call not instruction, but spiritual advice.
Right.
And that was given. And that was properly followed. He passed away shortly after the Lunar New Year. And his reincarnation was reborn in Mongolia. The Mongolian monastery and collectively with other Buddhist organizations had requested His Holiness to identify the 10th reincarnation. And since it was requested by a collective of organizations and Buddhist institutions, His Holiness had the responsibility to identify the child. So therefore, he went through the proper procedures of recognizing. And also in 2016, it was already, the boy was already identified, but not publicly announced.
Right.
So, so in 2016, the boy was already identified, but not publicly announced. Until now, it hasn't been publicly announced by the Mongolian side.
Yeah, I believe
There hasn't been a proper announcement. There hasn't been a proper declaration. There hasn't been a proper enthronement ceremony. There hasn't been a recognition ceremony of that nature. So we kind of knew who the boy was, but word gets around over time.
Right.
And I think Mongolia failed to take the appropriate measures or steps that is properly needed or historically required. So in 2023, during a public teaching that was requested by the Mongolian people, it happened so that the reincarnation was attending the teachings, and His Holiness just very publicly mentioned that today we're very fortunate that the reincarnation of the Bogd is joining us here today, and it was just simply just 2 paragraphs. And since it came from His Holiness, that
it carried the authority and weight that would
exactly
come from.
And that was recognized and accepted as the official recognition and announcement.
Right.
So since then, there hasn't been any, ceremony or any enthronement ceremony as of right now. So,
So
but
let's,
of course,
I'm sorry.
there's many reasons behind it and many speculations behind it. But nevertheless, the boy has been identified, whether it's official or not. There's a official recognition letter or endorsement by His Holiness, and that's where we are now today.
So let's backtrack a little bit. 2016, I believe His Holiness announced that he believed that the reincarnation had been born in Mongolia. But as you said, he had not identified the boy publicly, said there's no need to do so, he's very young, and so forth. But it was after that visit, I believe the Chinese government compelled or pressurized the Mongolian government to ban His Holiness from making subsequent visits to Mongolia. So do you believe that, I guess, the Mongolian government's silence was perhaps stemming from this need to keep that bilateral relationship stable?
Absolutely, absolutely. Of course, they're never gonna publicly accept it or mention it,
Right.
but based on how the geopolitical situation, the bilateral relations are going right now, there's no doubt that the Mongolian government is under very strong influence by the Chinese government. You know, right now, the way that I see it, whether Mongolia will accept it or not, and whether Mongolia will recognize it or not, but it is a true fact that, uh, you know, right now, the Mongolia is pretty much under control of China politically, economically, and now we can say spiritually as well. So they have a very strong influence to silence the Mongolian authorities, and which they have succeeded. And in this particular case, what's unique about the reincarnation of the 10th Bogd is that he was, you know, he's of Mongolian origin, of course, but he was born in America.
Right.
Therefore, he was born in, because he was born in America, you know, he automatically obtained U.S. citizenship.
Right.
So he is a U.S. citizen as of right now. Up until the age of 18, he has dual citizenship. By Mongolian law, by the time he reaches the age of 18, then he has to give up one of his
That's how
citizens.
okay.
Right. So it's either American or Mongolian. So up until then, yeah, you know, he has dual citizenship. So because he was born in America, you know, he's an American citizen. Because he was born, because he's Mongolian, you know, there's the and also being identified as the reincarnation of the 10th. You know, everybody's interested. You know, also India as well, because they understand the significance and the importance of Buddhism to Mongolia.
Right.
And the importance of the system of the reincarnation. It's not only for the Tibetan people, but for the Mongolian people as well, and of somebody of such high status, the equivalent of the Dalai Lama to the Mongolian people. Of course, you know, India wants to see how China will react if the boy came to India to study, or even if he paid a short visit, you know.
Right.
You know,
As he already
America.
has, for that
Yes, and
teaching.
yes, he has visited India on several occasions under uh, much secrecy, and but the plan and the wish, of course, is for him to study in India at the monastery, so that he has a proper monastic upbringing and education. But it seems that is likely not to happen in the near future because of China's pressure. And you know, America is also interested. How is Mongolia going to handle it? How the Chinese are going to react? You know, let's bring the boy to America. Let's see what Mongolia does. Let's see what China does. You know, if the boy goes to India, what will America do? What will Mongolia do? What will China do? You know, so there's so much being played out, and this is what I call a testing ground.
For
You
the
know,
15th Dalai Lama. Yeah.
or the 15th Dalai Lama, absolutely, And this is something that, I think the Central Tibetan administration fails to pay attention to. And I have brought this issue up on several occasions in several meetings, that we have to take a keen interest and follow these issues. We can't just simply say, "Oh, Dalai Lama's reincarnation."
Right.
It's not just the Dalai Lama's, reincarnation. It is also the Mongolian reincarnation, and not only, and this is not only about, it's not only about Tibet and Mongolia. It's about Buddhism,
Right.
in general. And of course, there would be many more reincarnations and that are going to pass and be reborn again and going to be identified. And this is a continuation. It has continued for the last, 800 years or so, and it has continued to this day, and it will need to continue in the future as well. So this is a very important matter, not only for the Tibetan people, but also for the Mongolian people as well. Just recently, there was a meeting that was held, about, strategy, possibilities and things like that, where there was one Tibetan who had mentioned in the meeting that, the question was arise. What is it that you expect, right? What is it that the Tibetans expect, from the global stage, and the expectation was that we expect everybody to support, this issue of the Dalai Lama, to support the Tibetan, the right to support the right decision.
Right.
So, my question was, well, what about the support of the Mongolian reincarnation? So, I mean, you want our support, we're willing to support, but what about us? What about our 10th?
Right. You feel perspectives need to broaden a little bit more and to
Absolutely.
see the big picture, and I guess what is a broadening
Absolutely.
geopolitical battleground.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you walk around Dharamsala or any exiled Tibetan community, and you ask about, do you know the Khalkha? I'm sure many of the older generation will know, because it was quite widely known among the elder generation. But most of the elder generation is now gone. Among the younger generation, they probably heard a little bit about it, but they don't know the historical background. They don't know the importance or the significance of that, And that's something that the younger generation needs to learn, not only the historical facts about the Tibet's reincarnation or the spiritual temporary leader, but also of their twin brother nation, Mongolia, I think it was earlier last year, I believe, I did a conference in Dharamsala, which was Tibet-Mongol relations, past, present, and future, right? And the focus was that I specifically wanted to focus on the 20th century Tibet-Mongol relations.
Right.
And the reason is, many of the Tibetans don't have a clue what happened in Mongolia in the 20th century. They have a generic idea. Oh, communism came, destroyed many monasteries. That's it.
Right.
Similarly, for the Mongolians, what happened in Tibet? Oh, communism came, many monasteries destroyed. That was it. They have that's very limited information that both sides. So the idea was to concentrate on the 20th century. When was the last scholar that went to Tibet? When was the last treaty signed? And, in the early 20th century, there was a treaty signed between the Mongols and the Tibetans. How did that fall apart? Right? Where did it cease? When did it cease?
Yeah, they recognized each other's independence when.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. That in 2011, I'm sorry, 1911 is when Mongolia declared, and I think it was in 1913 that that Tibet declared its independence. They supported each other. That what happened after that? How did that treaty cease? When did it cease? How did it cease? Tibetans don't have a clue. The Mongolians don't have a clue what happened, because they are already gone through, the Cultural Revolution, destruction in the 30s and the 40s, way before Tibet had gone under the communist, rule. So our focus was on the 20th century. And, of course, I was not surprised, but, many of the scholars who participated said, we don't know so much about each other anymore. All our historical facts is 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century and nothing in the 20th century. We need to focus more on that. And that is the only way for us to move forward, that we can establish much more stronger, bond and restore it. There's a gap and we need to fill that gap in order to move forward.
Right. So coming back to the 10th Khalkha Jetsun Dampa Rinpoche, or I should say 10th Bogd, I guess, in short.
Right.
So you believe his, as of now, American nationality, and I also believe he's one of a pair of identical twin brothers, and it isn't public knowledge which of the two is the Bogd. And do you believe that this, I guess, and the fact that I believe he's from a prominent Mongolian family with perhaps business and political clout, for the lack of a better word, do you believe that combination gives him protection from political interference? Many would worry about political interference from the Chinese. It is believed that His Holiness's announcement would have caused some disquiet in Beijing, for certain.
Well, let's say that even if the boy was born in a nomadic family, there would still be political pressure. And I think, in a way, I think it has been benefited that he was born in a prominent family. The grandmother is a former politician. She was a member of parliament for many, many years. And she established a business in the early 90s after Mongolia's, capitalism and open market policy. She was able to take advantage of the time changes and establish a corporation that became one of the leading corporations in Mongolian society. So we can't say why a child was born in this particular family,
Of
or
course,
only time will tell. But I do believe that because of her the grandmother's political background and knowing how to deal with the policies, the laws, and things like that, of course, it's a struggle. It's difficult. It's a situation that nobody wants to be in. Mainly because how things are going right now. But I think the Mongolian government, to begin with, on this particular matter dealing with China, I truly believe that they thought that they could use this boy in Mongolia's advantage in terms of dealing with China.
Right.
Let's keep the boy under our thumb, and we can use this for our benefit, for our profit.
For leverage in the bilateral relationship.
Right. And I think that backfired. That backfired to the point where now China won that game. China says, well, you can't send the boy to India. Where's freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of movement, freedom of, traveling? All of those are taken away.
Right.
And they come in with the name of national security. Oh, if the boy goes to India, it's a national threat. It's an economic threat. We will be sanctioned by China if the boy goes to India. I mean, do you call that freedom? Do you call that democracy? Do you call that liberty? Absolutely not. If the boy goes to India to obtain his spiritual education, Mongolia will be sanctioned. And again, that's a national security threat. If the boy goes to even within Mongolia, if the boy goes to a religious event in Gondan and is publicly exposed to the public, it's a national security. So
there's
I mean,
severe restrictions on him already, is what.
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, there's, there's many matters like this and situations like this that even the Tibetans don't even know that's happening, right?
Right.
So you want to protect the 15th Dalai Lama, then learn and see what's happening now.
Yeah, there's a precedent that's already in.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. We'll talk about preparation to how to how to deal with China's future recognition of the 15th. We already assume and predict that there is going to be 2 Dalai Lamas. Luckily for Mongolia, we only have 1, but still, how are we going to counterattack the Chinese propaganda, their claim of the reincarnation? And I think we have to look not only within the Tibetan circle but beyond its circles, and see what really happening around. And that's why I call it the testing ground.
Yeah. And before we get into what China may or may not do, further get into that, there's also, I guess, this question of what raising a reincarnate or Rinpoche in the 21st century could be like. Besides the geopolitical connotations that came with the 10th Bogd being announced, I believe his parents were initially reluctant to let him take on this role. I believe they were actually further coaxed into it by the Nechung Kutenla, the state oracle for the Tibetan government.
Well, I don't think that's I don't think he himself or the oracle played the critical most important role.
Right.
No, of course there's many other individuals that kind of slowly talk to the parents, give it time,
Yeah.
slowly convince them.
Yeah, what were their concerns, I guess? Were they strictly political?
They're born in America. I'm sorry, they're born in Mongolia, but they got their education abroad. They got their education in America. The mother, she went to high school in America, and further on she went to college in America. And the father, very similar case where he went to college. He got his bachelor's, master's, and PhD, and in the West. So they were brought up in a very modern, scientific, and a very financial background. The father is a mathematician professor. The mother is a leading businesswoman of Mongolia, so she has an economic background. So just like any other parent, they want their kids to grow up with a modern education, with a university, and possibly take over the family business in the future. So they have a very non-spiritual upbringing. So to them, this was not what they ever dreamed of or wished for. That was something totally new, and growing up in a very secular environment, and when you're bringing this subject of reincarnation, of course I think any parent would be shocked, don't know what to expect, and especially if you don't know much about your own religious traditions, and that alone, speaking of a reincarnation, of another person, that itself, of course, can be overwhelming. So I think of course, I can totally understand how and can only imagine the amount of pressure and stress that the parents went through, and and now they have accepted it. Okay, he's the reincarnation, whether we like it or not, accept it or not. This is the boy. We have to accept with the reality of how it is now. So now, moving forward, now the parents are saying, okay,
What
I
next?
accept it. Now, what's the plan moving forward? Right?
Right.
And now the plan moving forward is to isolate him from going to India, isolate him from going to America, the birthplace of where he's from. And I mean, is that part of the reincarnation, identifying process? And is that part of the upbringing? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You know. So of course, many individuals played a very important role of explaining everything in detail to the parents. It's not just an individual article. I do know that they have a friendship with the parents, but I don't think it's something that they talk about on a daily basis.
Right.
But yeah, here we are today. Uh, you know, trying to figure out how we can maneuver and give him the proper upbringing where he would be able to succeed and follow this tradition, and also hoping that he will have the proper uh, spiritual education that can be used for Mongolia's benefit of uniting the people, and also reviving and restoring and rebuilding Buddhism in Mongolia as well.
I can't imagine that the at least the public at large, or I guess religious communities, with the public, they can't be viewing such political interference favorably, especially if it's been prompted by the Chinese. And I guess we can broaden this question to how would these communities, and I guess you could include the Russian republics as well, how would they perceive or are perceiving China's attempts to control these reincarnations, including, the forthcoming case of the 15th Dalai Lama?
Well, I think right now, okay, so let's start with Mongolia.
Yeah.
Ex, you know, there's really not much information about the current Dalai Lama on general public social media's platform, and China loves that.
Yeah.
The public doesn't know what's going on in Tibet. The public doesn't know much about what's going on in the exile community. There's no Tibetan activists in Mongolia. There's really not much information about Tibet and the Dalai Lama and on a social media platform. So let's keep it that way. So, and right now, even about the 10th Bogd, there's really not much information. I mean, I'm sure you have done your research and you probably came across a few old articles.
Yes, a lot of what you're telling me is news. I wasn't aware of many of these restrictions
Right.
you brought up.
And any of the articles that came up is probably 2023 when His Holiness made the announcement.
Correct.
Is there any news that about the 10th Bogd in 2025?
Not that I could find any. No.
There's not. There's nothing. Right? So they want to keep it that way. Does Mongolia sincerely want to keep it that way? Absolutely not. But when your neighbor says, keep it quiet, keep it silent, don't propagate, don't announce it, if you do, then you're going to be sanctioned, when you're threatened with sanction. And, we have to understand that Mongolia is a landlocked country between Russia and China, and, you think about export, import, who has the money these days? If you compare Russia and China right now, China is leading economically. if we're exporting something, where is the closest ports? It's China. That's where it's going to go. If we are importing something, where's the industry to import the goods? It's China, not Russia. So we're highly reliant on China. So therefore, we have to take orders from China because of economic reasons mainly.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's in a way it's a joke, but in a way that's the true reality. If I'm craving for apples, I get my apples from China. If I want my vegetables, I get my vegetables from China. They're not born. They're not grown in Mongolia. They're not grown. Everything comes out. So just simple basic needs like that, where that's how reliant, independent we are on China. So, but nevertheless, this is a spiritual matter by constitution. It says church and state is separate, and it should be separated. It should be not only separated, but it should be recognized. Not only recognized, it should be practiced. On the government level, they should say, okay, that's a spiritual matter. Let's leave that up to the monastic institution. Let's talk business. Let's talk politics. Okay. Spiritual matter, according to our law, it's separate.
And we don't interfere, yeah.
Right. And we don't interfere. We respect it. That's what it's clearly mentioned. We respect. Right? And that's how it should be.
Right. And now I wanted to ask you about this because I came across some social media posts and even an article. It does seem like, and you would, of course, know the details, that there has been some degree of penetration by the Chinese of the monastic community within Mongolia. I came across the arrest of an abbot of a monastery, forgive my pronunciation, Ikhkuri maybe, and the name of the abbot is spelled Z and maybe
Right, Sanjay Dorje.
Correct. Who I believe was taking pro-China, and I guess there's even a sectarian rift within the Gelugpa sect that most of our audience will know about. But going against His Holiness when it comes to China and the Shugden or Dolgyal position, and this person was arrested along with two others for espionage. I'm not sure what his current status is. You would know better. So what could you tell us about, I guess, these religious figures and institutions within Mongolia who have been compromised?
Well, I think every community that you go to, whether it's Tibetan or European or Indian or wherever you go, within any political arena or any religious community or even social community, there always will be a few bad apples, what I call, right? So, there is always going to be people who are pro and anti. And in Mongolia, it's no different than any other community or society. Within the religious community, there is many pros, but at the same time, there is many anti. And Sanjay Dorje just happened to be one of those who out of, greed, not knowing the right and wrong, and he just simply saw his own personal interests and personal needs, and he decided to collaborate with the Chinese. And there's a substantial amount of evidence that he's been espionaging for the Chinese authorities within the religious community, and has been paid by the Chinese authorities to instigate and destabilize the unity of the Buddhist community. And it's not only him, but there is also few other individuals who are still under my understanding, under surveillance, and I'm sure that they are closely monitoring, and when the appropriate time comes, I'm sure that the Mongolian government will take appropriate measures. Just recently, I heard that about 3 weeks ago, I believe it was, that there was another monk that was also arrested. I'm still trying to confirm that information, but I did receive reliable information from my resources that there was another monk that was arrested recently for espionage. So I'm sure when the appropriate time comes, his name and his background will be, displayed. But for now, I think I think it's surprising, but at the same time, it's not a surprise.
Right.
You look in the Tibetan community, right? How many spies have been arrested, and how many people who've been under surveillance for many years, and it's still being monitored by the Indian government, in Dharamsala, and also in the monastic institutions in South India, and also abroad. I think it was about 2 years ago in New York, there was a Tibetan that was arrested who then I think it was last year somewhere in Northern Europe. I think in one of the Scandinavian countries, there was another Tibetan spy that was arrested, So I think this is not shocking, not surprising. It's just that something that we have to be vigilant and be aware of, and be cautious. Regardless, the movement of the reincarnation is not to overthrow any government, or go against any government policies or anything like that. It's just that it's a matter of religious freedom. It's our religious rights. This is what we are working and protecting: our rights of freedom of consciousness, freedom of religion, and this is what's important to everyone.
And how, if there is any information at all, did these individuals, I suppose, respond to or react to His Holiness identifying and I guess declaring the 10th Bogd? Because I think that would serve as a good indicator of how they might react to I guess, a legitimate 15th Dalai Lama.
Right. So, I think among the Mongolian society, there are people that say that, there is some individuals that say, Tibet is Tibet, Mongolia is Mongolia. Tibet has the Dalai Lama, we have the Bogd. Let's keep it separate, right? But at the same time, we have to understand the historical connections. Yes, it is two separate countries, two separate cultures. Yes, we understand that. Two separate sovereign countries, we understand that. But then again, the historical bond, what brought the Tibetan and the Mongolian people together, is their cultural ties and their spiritual ties. That's something that we cannot avoid, and something that we cannot separate at all. No matter how much we try to modify, there's no escaping from these historical matters and the current matters as well. So, and also at the same time, there's a Dogyal Shukden movement in Mongolia, which is funded by the Chinese side to destabilize the unity among the Mongolian people, to use that as a tool to go against His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And again, there is some Mongolians that also think that, okay, the Shukden issue, that's a Tibetan issue. That has nothing to do with Mongolia. Historically, that is not our problem, right?
Right.
And again, these are people that don't know the historical facts, and the people who listen or follow also don't know the historical facts. It's based on their current state of emotions, and their current state of mental disposition.
Right. Do you foresee, given what is happening with the 10th Bogd right now, that when we do arrive at this future, which is very likely to have two 15th Dalai Lamas, one identified ostensibly by the Ganden Podang Trust, one presumably appointed by the Chinese within Tibet. Do you see political pressure being applied to Mongolian and Buddhist Russians to publicly acknowledge, I guess, the Chinese appointed pretender, given, I guess, what seems to currently be an overwhelming dependence on China by both Mongolia and Russia?
Absolutely. It's not only Mongolia and Russia. I think internationally, China will definitely demand that every country recognize their appointed Dalai Lama. And as of right now, in many of the bilateral agreements that many of the countries sign with China, and one of the points is that that in order for us to agree on business, your country has to accept that there will be no anti-Chinese activities in your country. You have to accept that Tibet is part of China, and many countries have signed agreeing that China is a part of Tibet for their own economic purposes. Now, in the future, I would not be surprised if China included that in their future bilateral agreements, that you must accept, the Chinese appointed, Dalai Lama as the true reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. So it's not only with Mongolia and Russia, and it will be with many other countries. Now, the question is, will Mongolia or Russia accept it or not? I think it's a little bit too early to jump to conclusions and say, yes, they will sign, because who knows what the future will unfold. Government changes, people in power, they change all the time. Policy changes, law changes, people change, everything changes. The whole, political situation changes, everything changes. So I think it's, too early to jump to conclusions and say that Mongolia and Russia would agree. Now, if it was today, would they agree to do though? Well, we have to understand that the Panchen Lama, the issue of the Panchen Lama, the Mongolians have not signed or accepted the Chinese recognized Panchen Lama.
Correct.
So if they haven't accepted that, then why should they accept the Chinese appointed, Dalai Lama officially?
Has he ever traveled to Mongolia or the Russian republics?
Not yet.
Oh, he's never done that. Okay.
Not yet. But there's been many attempts, and it's an ongoing attempt to bring him to Mongolia and to Russia as well. But, he hasn't visited.
Yeah, perhaps one can take some comfort in that. Before we close, as the whole Tibetan Buddhist world approaches what's undoubtedly going to be a delicate transition, it seems you're already grappling with the transition as far as the 10th Bogd is concerned in Mongolia. But when we come to this question of the 15th Dalai Lama, you are a spiritual leader. What role do you see for yourself, and I guess other senior lamas and Rinpoches? I guess this could apply to Mongolia, also the Russian Buddhist Republics. How would you prepare Buddhist communities in these areas for what lies ahead?
Well, I think what's most important is the awareness and educating the public about the historical facts, the historical procedures, and it's up to the individual to use their own intellect to choose right from wrong. The last 30 years, what we have done in Russia is to restore these historical relationships. And no matter how much China will try, and also the local Russian government will try to, change course or change our beliefs, or it's not possible. It's not something as changing your mind, like by saying like, oh, we were going to have rice and dal tonight, but, we decided to have rice and bendin, and, something else, and everybody says, well, okay, it's okay. We don't have dal. Let's have bendi. It's not simple as that, it's a spiritual matter. It's something that's deep down inside. It's faith, it's something that cannot physically be taken away. So I think, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is in the hearts of every Mongolian, Tibetan, Kalmyk, Buryat, and Tuva. And that's something that cannot be taken away, no matter how much the history will be distorted. And everybody will use their own human intellect to tell what's right from wrong. And our job is to ensure that people are properly aware, educated, and know what's happening, and let them decide. And right now, I'm no longer the head of the Buddhist community, but we have laid the foundation for proper growth. We have laid the foundation for proper development. We have laid the foundation for proper revival of the teachings and of Buddha and the system and the tradition of Buddhism. So now it's up to the future generations, whether to modify it, to change it, to change their policies, or to implement. So I leave that up to the future generation. But I'm pretty confident that the people of Kalmykia, in particularly, where I was mostly responsible for, and also Buryatia, Tuva, and the Mongolian people will definitely choose what's right for them and for Tibetan Buddhism.
Telo Rinpoche, that was most insightful. Thank you very much for your time and what was a fascinating episode.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
For me.